Right, we're finally there. We're finally at the quarter-final section of finding our best All-Ireland winner of the last 16 seasons. So just to bring it up on screen there and remind anyone who hasn't been tuned in lately, we did the round of 16 clashes. So Kilkenny 2007 got through after beating Galway 2017. 05 Cork beat 2019 Tipperary. Then you had 2013 Clare seeing off 2015 Kilkenny. These were all public votes now. 2011 Kilkenny beat 06 Kilkenny. And then the bottom half of the draw, you have 2018 Limerick getting through to meet 2010 Tip, and then 2008 Kilkenny against 2016 Tipperary. So there's a nice enough spread of different sort of teams at this stage, and I think it's a pretty tasty little quarter final, our first quarter final that we have with Kilkenny 2007 against Cork 2005. Because what you're talking about there is two teams that basically completed back to back.
Yeah, we've removed any dead wood. I'm sure no one would be happy if we called dead wood after being All Ireland winners, but we've definitely reduced it down a bit. I suppose sometimes when things go to public vote, maybe they don't go as you would have expected. There was definitely a couple of them that didn't go the way I would have thought anyway. But down to a really interesting duel, and it's funny. Obviously, Cork and Kilkenny played quite a bit. They played in 03 and 04 in the finals, but Kilkenny 07 were probably a different proposition than they were when they played in 03 and 04. So it's an interesting kind of a duel. There would have been a decent few different new bodies coming and going between the two teams. But yeah, it's going to be an interesting enough one. Very different paths to the final, as I'm sure you'll go into in a second as well.
Yeah, sure, no better place to start. I think you were looking at the Kilkenny path. They basically coasted through against teams that weren't quite at the same level, probably glorified club teams in a lot of cases.
Well, yeah, I don't know about glorified pub teams or glorified club teams, but Kilkenny's path to the final in 07 and even win the final. Like, I just have it down here. Unfortunately, I don't like using the word, but it's hammered Offaly, hammered Wexford, hammered Galway, hammered Wexford, hammered Limerick. That's the way it was. And at that stage, they were, I don't know, if you look back on it now, Kilkenny even then, they looked like a well-oiled machine. They looked like a well-oiled machine. They were all in unbelievable condition. They played to a pattern that suited them, a fairly kind of not rigid enough pattern, but you kind of knew what they were going to do. You see maybe some of the teams that they come up against, maybe the physical conditioning that they were coming up against wasn't quite what they had themselves, and they were able to kind of bully teams. And definitely throughout 07, they definitely did bully teams.
Yeah, it was. I'd say a lot of those teams were beaten before they ever went out. So then, just to look at Cork's path in 2005, do you get a sense that was any more impressive? I mean, my memories are the Munster final in Cork. I was down at it. Tipperary were something like 9 points down at half time. Basically beaten out the gate for most of it, but almost came back and beat Cork for a finish. And that Cork team, they didn't have to play Kilkenny in the final. I'd say in some ways it was a relief that Galway did the hard work for them.
Definitely, they were battle hardened the whole way through. To be fair to Kilkenny, it would have to say a team that's able to hammer teams the whole way through, and you'd often say, "Oh, they never got a test," and then when someone put it up to them, they were maybe struggling or something. But they never had that. They were just coasting the whole way through, which is a testament to them, in fairness. But when you look at Cork's passage, beat Waterford by 2 points, another deadly game in the Munster semi-final. Beat Tip by 5 in a good game. Beat Waterford by 5 in the quarter-final. Beat Clare in one of the greatest arm wrestlings of all time in All-Ireland semi-final. Clare were in a winning position in that game. It was Dalo's last game in charge, I think, or one of his. No, not his last game. It was his last game that year. Obviously, he was in charge in 06 as well, to the best of my knowledge. They would beat them by 1, then beat Galway by 5, but it was pretty tight the whole way through. So I'd say if you're looking at who had the harder tests the whole way through, Waterford, Tip, Waterford, Clare, Galway was a fair test the whole way through. But something that you said definitely is worth making a point on. Kilkenny were obviously beaten in 05 for Cork. And one of the big things, and even just was looking back at Owen Larkin's book, just doing a bit of research, and he said, in 2005, Noel Hickey had to set out the latter stages of the championship after being diagnosed with a viral infection of the heart. He was a huge loss, and his absence could well have cost us the All-Ireland, which is a fair point. He said there's no way Niall Healy would have scored 3 goals off Noel Hickey in his prime in that year's semi-final, which is a fair point too. It's just another maybe point. Kilkenny conceded 5-18 in an All-Ireland semi-final, which was unheard of then and is still unheard of now.
even in his book, didn't Brian Cody talk about how he was tempted to walk away after that semi-final in '05, and then three players kind of approached him, and I suppose more or less he was shy enough on detail, didn't actually name who the three players were, but they must have convinced him to come back. And I'm going to guess that Shefflin was one of them. And sure, if Shefflin, who was obviously up there at the very best at the time, is saying it, he probably felt emboldened enough to keep going, because that would have meant you'd have the dressing room. I'm going to look at the teams in the All-Ireland finals, and I'll bring up that Cork team first, and the team they played against, which, as you mentioned, was Galway. So Donald Cusack in goal, Brian Murphy, Dermot O'Sullivan, Pat Mulcahy, John Gardner, Ronan Curran, Sean O'Halpine, Tom Kenny and Jerry O'Connor, who would be hurler of the year, Kieran Fraggy Murphy, Niall McCarthy, Timmy McCarthy, Ben O'Connor, Brian Corcoran and Joe Dean. I mean, you're not exactly going to pick too many holes in that team, and it just felt as I was going through that team, I was there looking for weaknesses. And some people might question Timmy McCarthy's hurling, and I've spoken a few times about how I definitely would have great time for the way he delivered, and again in this final here he ended up getting a couple of scores. Brian Murphy, cornerback, brilliant, even though he probably doesn't get all the plaudits he deserves. That half back line is obviously really good, so it's very hard to pick too many holes in that team.
The only holes, as you said, and you've kind of alluded to them there, the only holes he could find is maybe in the half-forward line. Frankie Murphy was not, he was on the team more often than he was off it, but he was on and off a bit. Niall McCarthy and Timmy McCarthy were great soldiers. Maybe not the most consistent, maybe. Like if you were looking at the Kilkenny half-forward lines, where you're bringing in, Owen Larkin, Henry Shefflin, maybe a Richie Power, those type of players, I would say for consistency, Kilkenny's half-hour line in '07 and even any of those Kilkenny teams probably had greater consistency. But when Niall McCarthy, Timmy McCarthy and these boys delivered, as they did in the '04 final, Cork invariably won. But just on consistency, I would say if you're comparing the two, I'd be taking the Kilkenny half-hour line over the Cork half-hour line every day of the week, being honest.
Yeah, but in this situation, we are actually talking about that team from '05 versus the team from '07. So I think the consistency over the years probably goes out the window a little bit. We jump onto that Kilkenny team from 2007 in the final against Limerick when there wasn't too much fuss. Shefflin, of course, went off with a cruciate by half-time. So that's a big factor to look at here, because if that had to happen against Cork, you're damn sure that Cork would try and find a way to punish you for that Cork team at that time. So in goals, PJ Ryan, Michael Kavanagh, Noel Hickey, Jackie Tyrrell, Tommy Walsh, Brian Hogan and JJ Delaney set up much vaunted half-back line. Derek Ling and James Chaff Fitzpatrick, Willie O'Dwyer, Martin Comerford, Owen Larkin, Eddie Brennan, Henry Shefflin, as we've mentioned, and Aidan Taggy Fogarty. So again, you have a lot of lads who over the years probably delivered in, Taggy was man of the match in the All-Ireland the year before. Eddie Brennan obviously went to town in this game. So there's very few lads you can question there. Again, the half-forward line, probably the least stellar of the lines on the field, even if there is good quality there.
Yeah, just even you mentioned, just to make it even more impressive, like Shefflin going off at half-time. He obviously went off after 11 minutes in 2010, and that many people would have said that was a nail in the coffin for them. He was able to go off. He had a good bit done, to be fair. He'd 1-3 scored and a really good goal. He got off was it Stephen Lucy, I think. And the fact that he was able to come off, Willie O'Dwyer was pulled off after 26 minutes. They were able to bring in Richie Power. Noel Hickey, who carried a hamstring injury into that game, was off early as well. It was very funny, actually. I remember chatting to someone who was down at the Kilkenny training session maybe 2 weeks before that game, and Brian Begley was full forward, and he was after doing damage on Waterford in the All-Ireland semi-final. And the way they had it was that it was just aerial bombardment in on top of Martin Comerford. That was one of the main game plans. It was back in the day when you could go in and actually see these things, and they were prepping Noel Hickey for this, and obviously he did very well on Begley in the first 20 minutes. He never got really a sniff at, but it's just kind of even a throwback or looking back at that you were actually able to see something that might manifest itself in the game. You wouldn't even dream of that. Like now, if that was the case now, it'd be like the Donegal fella down in Kerry. You'd have to be up a tree or something to see any of those things going on now. But it's just kind of mad. And even just reading the match report from the '07 final, and even the intro, I think, in the Independent kind of sums it up fairly well. Kilkenny banked a large early deposit and lived comfortably off the interest for the remainder of the All-Ireland hurling final that didn't deviate from script by a single line in Croke Park yesterday. And that was Kilkenny. they wouldn't, and that was that Kilkenny team in 07 going into their pomp in a couple of years' time. They just kind of cut you off at the throat, and that was it. They never left you in or left any doubts. Like Cork left some doubts in the 05 final. They left the door ever so slightly ajar for Galway to come through. And I know you were talking there off air before we started about Derek Hardiman hits a point, which was a great chance to leave in a ball inside, which could have been a crucial goal. But Kilkenny didn't leave teams with that opportunity. They didn't leave even teams thinking, jeez, if we did this, if we did that. They just cut you off at the very start. That game was over in 07 after 10 minutes. It was 2-3 to no score. And just even as well, the way they targeted Seamus Hickey. Seamus Hickey, I think, was Young Hurler of the Year still after, but they put Eddie Brennan in on him, hit every ball in as low as they could to him, and let Eddie Brennan take him on a pace. I think he scored 1-5 off him. And they were just brilliant at targeting a team's weak link back then even. And that was just one of the calling cards of that team. But yeah, it's an interesting battle. Like, I know we kind of talked off air as well. The two half back lines were the two launch pads, and I'd be interested to see what you would think if you were to pick your best half back line of those six. So Gardner, Curran, O'Halpine, Walsh, Hogan, Delaney. What would your best three be?
That is an absolute nightmare. Because within Kilkenny, you hear a lot of people saying that JJ Delaney was better than Tommy Walsh. And then like Sean O'Halpine feels like a name that's going to transcend the ages, because he's just the way he burst out with the ball, and he's just a doesn't back down sort of player. Yet at the same time, Ronan Curran doesn't have 3 All-Stars for nothing. I think Brian Hogan is probably going to lose out, even though he's obviously unbelievably consistent over the years. I think Gardner will probably lose out. So then you've got 4 into 3.
And you're leaving off. Like, realistically, you're going to either leave off. You have to obviously pick your 6. Curran is going to be our 6. So you're going to have to leave off either Tommy Walsh, JJ, or Sean O.
So there's already been a Lake Regale about Tommy Walsh. As we're recording, there's one coming out about JJ Delaney tonight. And Sean O'Halpine, I presume, has one.
Yeah.
Ronan Curran shouldn't be too far away from having one either. This is a bit of a nightmare. Two vaunted half back line. Do you know what? I'll just pull the trigger. Oh, Jesus. Is there any way I can shove JJ Delaney into full back or corner back or something?
No, I was only thinking, you'd probably love to put JJ centre back or Sean Ogg centre back, but you can't do that. No, for me it will be Walsh, Curran, Delaney. Just Sean Ogg has to play 7, but he'd just be edged out. JJ is the best defender I've ever seen.
Do you know what? The way he can burst out with the ball and sort of, even though he didn't score that much over his career, I'm going to go Tommy, Curran, JJ. No, Tommy Curran, Sean O'Halpine. Yeah, okay. I'm going to go that way. And it's not like I've anti-Kilkenny bias. It's a Cork player I'm choosing ahead of him. I get no joy picking either.
To be fair to you, you have both. You have both biases normally, so you definitely can't be judged to be biased anyway.
Can I leave 3 empty jerseys back there? What about then? We've talked about the paths to the final, and I think we agree that Cork had the harder path. But just if you were to isolate it to the finalist alone, like, it's not like Limerick had come in and blitzed everyone before them. They'd won that trilogy against Tipperary, got suckered for a nice few goals in the Munster final by Waterford, came through the back door, suckered Waterford, who had to go for a replay against Cork. It's not as if this was a much vaunted Limerick team, really, by comparison with Galway, who had beaten Kilkenny in the semi-final.
Yeah, no, we actually beat Limerick in the qualifiers the year after, having been in the All-Ireland final and having won that trilogy and beaten Waterford. We beat them, and we beat them fairly convincingly down in the Gaelic grounds, actually. And if you look through, it's funny, if you look through some of the Limerick names, the likes of Mike Fitzgerald and other names, Mike O'Brien as well. Maybe, obviously, he was on the scene for a long time, Mike O'Brien was, but names that you kind of half forget, like Brian Murray got an All-Star in goals in 07, which maybe a lot of people looking back maybe wouldn't remember. So a lot of those lads maybe wouldn't have stood the test of time for a decade's hurling at inter-county level. Would say Peter Lawler would be another one, a very good player, brilliant wing back, and was on those the under-21 teams that won All-Irelands, but like maybe didn't nail down a place at senior county level for the guts of a decade. So yeah, I think Kilkenny did what they had to do against maybe a team that probably wouldn't stand the test of time now at inter-county level, if we're being honest.
Who do you think is the better goalkeeper here, PJ Ryan or Donal Cusack? 2 years later, PJ Ryan gets an All Ireland final man of the match against Tipperary. But I think you'd have to say that's probably 2 years away from his very best performance. Whereas Donal made a crucial save in the All Ireland final late on, then dived on the ball, should have been a penalty, and it was given as a 21-yard free. He was fairly consistent throughout that game. So I'd say in the goals anyway, you'd probably have to give it to Cork.
I think you would, to be fair. Like, Don't know got a brilliant Cork career, and even back then, I remember playing Cork in the league in '07. I think it was my first ever match with Offaly, actually, first ever league game, and I was playing corner back, and I forget who was playing wing back in front of me, but it was just they started the wing forward was vacating space, and Donal was hitting space. Like, he was hitting space with puck outs maybe long before any of the football goalies were doing it now, or even long before even a lot of hurling goalkeepers do. He's a serious innovator, and just a very top class goalie, really. Brilliant shot stopper, brilliant communicator. One of those players that, while he maybe wouldn't dazzle you with his skills and that, it was the sum of all his parts. It was the communication. It was the how tight he kept that defence, and then how he was able to do all the other aspects of his game to a really high level. So yeah, and he had a much longer career, probably too, in goals than PJ Ryan did. So it would be Donal for me anyway, definitely, yeah.
I don't think there's much debate on who has the stronger bench, and I'll just jump back to that Kilkenny bench as well. Again, John Tennyson came on, Michael Fennelly came on, Richie Power came on. Then, of course, you don't even see Michael Rice, John Dalton, like TJ Reid, who would go on to be hurler of the year. So, very impressive bench. Just jumping to Cork there, Neil Ronan and Kieran Hero Murphy, who were good players, they came on. But I don't think there's much of a debate on that sort of in terms of depth. But then what about some of the matchups? Like, Owen Larkin wouldn't have played against that iteration of the Cork team. And by '07, he was an important part of Kilkenny. Maybe Jackie Tyrrell, who hadn't really kind of nailed down his spot yet, against Ben O'Connor, who was at the height of his powers. What about then maybe Jerry O'Connor, who would win Hurler of the Year against Cha Fitzpatrick? So there's some mouth-watering potential battles there.
Yeah, the Jackie Tyrrell and Ben O'Connor one is one that particularly would stand out for me. Jackie was obviously, and he kind of documented in his book the doubts he would have, and particularly marking certain lads. I think if he was marking Ben O'Connor around that time, anytime between '05, '07, '08, he definitely would have had doubts in his head over marking him, because he kind of said he was more fallible against that kind of quick forward that could get the ball and take him on. But Jackie was one of the funny ones. Like, he was rarely skinned. Like, he was rarely skinned. And you kind of thought maybe he could get caught for legs or something like that. But he was so physical. He was so physical and able to wear his opponent down. He'd probably find a way. Ben O'Connor probably get 2 or 3 off him. But he definitely wouldn't. I'd say they'd probably cancel each other out. Jackie kind of looked like he was going to struggle sometimes, but invariably he'd find a way. Jerry O'Connor and Cha Fitz would be very, very interesting. 2 different types of players. Cha didn't travel with the ball, I would say, like Jerry did. Jerry travelled with the ball. Him and Ben, their whole game was based on movement and taking the ball into the tackle and away from tackles and that kind of thing. Whereas Cha was, Cha could make the ball talk. For an inside forward, he was an absolute dream. He put that lovely ball into Sheffield at the start of the '07 final in this game here. And yeah, he was sort of lad that if you were a cornerback and Cha had the ball and you tried to hurl from the front, it's almost like he'd see you hurling from the front and he put it in over your head. Do you know what I mean? He was gifted at delivering the ball in there. Not sure who you take. I think probably Jerry O'Connor for me. Jerry over Cha.
I think so at that time. Another matchup I'd love to see is Brian Murphy circa '05 against the Eddie Brennan that did so much damage on Seamus Hickey. And also you have to take into account that both full forward and full back for Kilkenny go off injured by half time. And I'm starting to lean towards towards Cork. Another thing actually, before we go on to deciding who we think, and then obviously we'll put it out to the public vote on OurGame.ie, but Brian Cody, who would go on to win so much as Kilkenny manager, and he's still going, by the way, against John Allen. And just when I look at John Allen, who obviously took over from Donal O'Grady and won this All-Ireland, the stuff he won as a player, between hurling and football. So with Cork in Munster, he has a football and a hurling medal. He has 2 All-Irelands in hurling. He has a league in football with Cork. Then with the club, he has 4 county titles in football, 5 in hurling, 4 Munster clubs in football. one All-Ireland, or one Munster in hurling, and then he has 3 club All-Irelands in football and 1 in hurling. An absolutely outrageous return, and makes Cody's 2 Leinsters and 2 All-Irelands at club level almost look a bit paltry. Never mind his 4 Leinsters, 3 All-Irelands and 2 leagues with the county. So it's actually unbelievable kind of return from their playing careers.
Yeah, savage return. Obviously, Cody captained Kilkenny to win All Ireland as well. John Allen then slips in as Cork manager and wins an All Ireland in his first season. Didn't he win All Ireland in his first season as Cork manager? And then he won. He obviously won a Munster with Limerick then as well when he was over Limerick too. So like it's fair going. Cody obviously like. You'd nearly be getting sick listening to what you were calling out there, and then you throw in 11 All Irelands as a manager. God only knows how many Leinsters, and I think seven or eight leagues as well. You know, it's savage, really. Two managers with glittering playing careers that went on to have obviously glittering managerial careers as well. But if you're putting the gun to my head about which of these I take,
Don, before you do, free taker is another thing to consider. Do you want Ben O'Connor or do you want Henry Shefflin?
I'd want Henry realistically. But I tell you, I wouldn't. Ben wouldn't be a bad backup to have now.
And then he would be a bad backup to him.
Yeah. Joe Dean for any free 45 yards or inside. Not bad. You're kind of spoiled for a choice there too. Obviously, Henry went off and had Richie Power to take the frees. Like, you know, a brilliant free taker as well. It's going to be a tight one, I'd say. It's going to be a tight one.
I think I'm going to go with Cork on the basis that they had a harder path. They had a harder finalist. I think Kilkenny actually, one of their players who they won the All Ireland, and one of their players didn't win Hurler of the Year, whereas Dan Shanahan did. Whereas Jerry O'Connor hit unbelievable heights that year, and I'm not sure that any one of the Kilkenny players going man to man would have beaten him that year. And I think Brian Corcoran could have done a little bit of damage. Wily old fox that he is, with Joe Dean and around him, Ben O'Connor in that sort of form. It's not by much, but I just think for those reasons, I'd just about give it to Cork.
Yeah, not sure if the Cork half forward line would have been able to manage this Kilkenny half back line. I think they'd be winning 2 out of 3 positions minimum, possibly the 3. And when you look at their passage through, you could say maybe what they beat wasn't outstanding, or maybe it wasn't a vintage year, but they coasted the whole way through. Managed to lose their best player at half time and managed to lose their full back, 2 of their most important players, and still coasted to All Ireland success. It's Kilkenny for me.
Kilkenny actually did lose that second half to Limerick. Now it meant nothing. It was just containment at that point. Didn't matter what the score was. But just if it's a game of inches here,
it means absolutely nothing. They were enough up that they could coast home. Totally irrelevant. That's like saying a horse was 10 lengths up halfway and he won the race by 9 lengths, but he lost the last half of the race. It's completely irrelevant.
Well, anyway, we'll put it out there on OurGame.ie so you can vote and let us know who you think should win it.